The courthouse was already buzzing before the first gavel sounded, though nobody inside wanted to admit it. Phones were out, pens poised, cameras aimed, and the air thick with anticipation, like the moment right before a storm breaks. Diddy sat at the defendant's table, hands cuffed, shoulders stiff, eyes staring at a point on the floor, as if it could somehow shield him from what was coming. He knew the headlines were already forming outside in real time. Hidden bottle discovered. Diddy's life sentence under threat. Every syllable, every pixel of news flashing across the world would land squarely on him. He felt it, heavy in his chest, each breath labored, the weight of fame and infamy colliding in a single, unstoppable tide. Judge Arun Subramanian entered, robe swishing, expression unreadable. The room fell silent so quickly it felt like someone had sucked the air out entirely. The gavel hit once, and the world began moving in slow motion. Prosecutors, eyes cold, were already pushing forward with files, thick folders stacked like bricks, waiting to crush. Diddy's lawyer, Mark Agnello, leaned close, whispering words meant to reassure, but even the softest voice sounded hollow against the roar of impending judgment. The first few moments were procedural, mundane almost, but the undercurrent was anything but normal. Everyone knew because the documents hinted at it, because the whispers leaked in corridors that this was no ordinary contraband hearing. This was the revelation of a second bottle, carefully hidden, carefully manipulated, and now, carefully weaponized against the man who once dominated stages with a snap of his fingers. The prosecution began with deliberate precision, presenting evidence in layers, each more damning than the last. Photographs of the second bottle, concealed behind a stack of personal items, were displayed on the monitors. The glass caught the light, gleaming like a sinister jewel. Notes from the prison staff detailed the discovery. Suspicious behavior observed. Refusal to cooperate. Concealment of alcohol. Each word was a hammer, each phrase a nail driving deeper into the coffin of Diddy's credibility. He didn't flinch. He barely breathed. It was as if the life he had once commanded, the spotlight, the music, the power, was being stripped away in slow motion, page by page, photo by photo. Agnello attempted a defense, arguing procedural error, arguing intent, arguing anything that could carve a fraction of doubt into the wall of evidence. The judge lifted a hand, sharp, final. Sit. The single word silenced the room, and Diddy sagged slightly, the tension pulling him down like gravity had doubled. Outside, reporters murmured, sensing the story morphing into something catastrophic. Inside, the logs from Fort Dix were laid bare. Late-night movements, irregular gatherings near his bunk, unexplained odors noted by multiple officers. Each log read like a paragraph from a criminal dossier rather than notes from a correctional facility. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a lapse. It was pattern. It was premeditation. And it was now his story, whether he wanted it or not. The prosecutor's voice didn't waver. This is not merely possession. This is coordination, concealment, repeated disregard for federal regulations. This is a threat to institutional order, and it cannot be ignored. The word coordination struck like a shockwave. Coordination meant influence. Influence meant danger. The gallery felt it, stiffened at the implication. The judge's gaze never left Diddy. He could see the subtle signs: clenched jaw, shallow breathing, hands trembling ever so slightly against the cuffs. A superstar reduced to human fragility, stripped of his aura, exposed under the brutal lights of courtroom scrutiny. Then came the internal behavioral reports, the psychological assessments. Diddy's paranoia, his agitation, his fixation on staff behavior, all meticulously documented. He shifted uneasily in his seat, the weight of observation pressing on him like invisible chains. The room seemed to pulse with every damning word. Reporters scribbled furiously, aware that the narrative unfolding was no longer about alcohol, no longer about contraband, no longer even about rule-breaking. This was about control, compliance, and the perception of risk. A perception that could define the remainder of Diddy's life. The prosecutor laid out the mental health report carefully, savoring each phrase. Volatility, risk, further misconduct. 3 words that sounded simple yet carried the weight of catastrophe. Diddy's head tilted slightly, absorbing them like blows. Each term tightened the noose. Each sentence framed a future that was now terrifyingly inevitable. Silence engulfed the courtroom, thick and suffocating, as the judge leaned back, his fingers steepled, eyes piercing. He had every piece of the mosaic, the bottles, the logs, the assessments. It was complete. The room knew it, even if no one dared speak it aloud. Diddy sat motionless, a man whose legacy now seemed irrelevant, whose fame could no longer shield him from the gravity of consequence. Outside, the world waited for the gavel to fall, for the announcement that would redefine a life, a career, a narrative. Inside, the air felt heavier, each breath drawn a conscious act of defiance against inevitability. The stage was set, the story laid bare, and one sentence, one decision, would determine everything. The courtroom hung on a razor's edge. Every heartbeat seemed amplified, every whisper magnified. Diddy remained at the center, frozen, his mind a storm of disbelief and fear. The second bottle wasn't just contraband, it was a symbol of every misstep, every overlooked warning, every opportunity he had been given and squandered. Now, it was being used as the nucleus of his downfall. The prosecutor leaned forward, eyes cold, voice deliberate, as if savoring the unraveling of a man who once commanded the world. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, "in addition to the discovery of the second bottle, internal communications from Fort Dix reveal a disturbing pattern of intent and concealment. Mr. Combs did not simply stumble into rule-breaking, he orchestrated it." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Orchestrated. The word struck with surgical precision. Every journalist, every observer, every officer felt it reverberate in their bones. Agnello rose immediately, face tight with controlled urgency. "Objection, Your Honor. These conclusions are speculative. Coordination, orchestration, these are interpretations, not facts." The judge's eyes, dark and unyielding, fixed on Agnello. "Sit," he said. One word, final, enough to silence both the defense and the gallery. Agnello sank back into his chair, tension coiling in his shoulders. Diddy's chest rose and fell unevenly. He swallowed hard, the taste of iron sharp in his mouth, each word outside the room's soundscape amplifying the weight pressing on him. The prosecutor opened a new folder, thicker than the previous ones. These documents include surveillance logs, officer reports, and internal notes from the behavioral unit, he said, placing them carefully on the evidence table. The pages seemed to radiate authority, each sheet a nail in the coffin of leniency. He flipped one page, then another, his movements slow, deliberate. On November 7th, officers documented repeated late-night movement, irregular gatherings near Mr. Combs's bunk, and attempts to hide materials from routine inspections. Multiple officers, independent observations, consistent patterns. This is not an accident. This is deliberate. This is premeditated. The words cut deeper than any headline ever could. Diddy's hands clenched, trembling at the wrists. For a moment, he let his gaze wander to the walls. The lights, anything that wasn't the evidence stacked before him. He remembered a time when he could control the room, control perception, control outcome. Now, control was gone. Everything was gone. The gallery leaned forward, collectively holding its breath. The judge adjusted his glasses, scanning the reports. Each line was damning. Each note reinforced the narrative. Diddy wasn't a first-time offender. He was a repeat pattern, a destabilizing force. The prosecution's voice rose, yet remained measured. Further, investigators discovered that Mr. Combs had removed a communal laundry towel without authorization, using it to conceal the second bottle. The act demonstrates intent to manipulate materials, to bypass controls, to actively subvert institutional order. Agnello's hands trembled as he raised a protest, his voice desperate but contained. "Your Honor, this is circumstantial. A towel removed does not prove criminal intent." The judge's gaze never wavered. "Your argument has been noted, Counselor." "Proceed," he said. The single acknowledgement hung heavy, carrying no comfort, no room for error. Diddy felt it as if the air itself had thickened, pressing down on his chest, on his spine, on the very essence of him. The prosecutor's next words landed like explosives in the silent room. Moreover, internal memos indicate that following the initial discovery of alcohol, Mr. Combs became unusually withdrawn, refused programs, skipped meals, and showed confrontational behavior toward staff. Behavioral assessments note paranoia, agitation, and fixation traits, increasing the likelihood of further misconduct. This is not speculation. This is documented, observed, and verified by multiple professionals. Diddy's stomach turned. His knees felt weak, though he remained standing. The room's weight pressed in from all sides. Cameras clicked. Scribes wrote furiously, but nothing could capture the magnitude of the moment. Outside, the world watched in fragmented headlines. Diddy labeled volatile by prison's psych team. Assessment could worsen life sentence review. Superstar's future hanging by single thread. Every phrase outside mirrored the fear inside. Agnello leaned toward Diddy, whispering, almost inaudibly, "We can fight this. We have options." Maybe, but Diddy didn't respond. He couldn't. His focus was locked on the evidence table, on the second bottle, on the surveillance stills, the logs, the memos. Each piece screamed the same conclusion. There was no escape. Every chance had been squandered, every leniency ignored. The judge's voice cut through the tension, low, deliberate, unyielding. "Mr. Combs, do you understand that interfering with institutional order is one of the gravest offenses in federal custody?" Diddy's lips parted slightly, the word yes hovering unspoken, trapped by fear. His eyes darted involuntarily toward the prosecution, then the gallery, then back to the table. Reality had settled on him with the finality of a guillotine. He wasn't just on trial for a bottle. He was on trial for his entire ability to live within the system, for his capacity to respect boundaries, for his very future. The room was silent save for the hum of fluorescent lights and the soft shuffle of papers. Every detail had been laid bare. The strategy of concealment, the pattern of behavior, the escalation, all documented meticulously. Diddy's heart raced, yet his body remained frozen, a paradox of motion and immobility. The prosecution rested, their point clear. This was beyond mitigation. This was beyond sympathy. This was the final reckoning. And the gallery, the press, the world outside, none of them doubted what was coming next. The room seemed to shrink around Diddy. Every sound felt exaggerated, the faint scrape of a chair, the rustle of a pen, the soft click of a camera shutter. Time slowed to a crawl. Judge Subramanian leaned back slightly, his gaze piercing, as if he could see through Diddy to every misstep, every transgression, every thought that had led him here. The gallery waited, collectively suspended, knowing that the next words would not just define a sentence, they would define a life. "Mr. Combs," the judge began, voice measured but heavy, "this court has examined every report, every file, every testimony presented in your case. From the initial sentencing to today, you have had opportunities to demonstrate rehabilitation. Instead, your actions have shown a deliberate, sustained pattern of disregard for federal rules." Diddy's throat tightened, his jaw clenched, and he gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. It wasn't just the words, it was the weight behind them. Every syllable pressed against him like iron bands. Outside, a low hum of cameras and murmurs persisted. But inside, it was still, tense, oppressive. The judge's voice lowered, deliberate, and each word fell like a hammer. "This is no longer about contraband. It is about your willingness, or lack thereof, to adhere to the structure designed to protect not only you, but everyone within Fort Dix. This court must now consider whether remaining leniency is appropriate." A shiver ran through the courtroom. Leniency. Diddy hadn't even thought about it in weeks, but now it was clear. Whatever was left had evaporated. The second bottle, the behavioral reports, the memos, they were not merely evidence. They were proof of a man who would not, bend to rules designed to preserve order. Agnello whispered urgently, leaning close, voice tight with controlled panic. "We can argue mitigation. You can show remorse." Diddy shook his head minutely, almost imperceptibly. His gaze remained fixed on the evidence table, on the second bottle, on the meticulous records documenting his supposed dissent. He knew it was too late. The room's silence magnified every heartbeat, every inhale, every fraction of a second stretching like eternity. The prosecutor's eyes glinted with cold precision. "Your Honor, and the wronger. One say cancer. The behavioral assessments alone indicate that Mr. Combs exhibits volatility, paranoia, and fixation. His refusal to participate in programs and his confrontational behavior towards staff suggest he is a destabilizing presence. The risk of further misconduct is significant and immediate. The words hit Diddy like a wave. He had felt cornered before, under public scrutiny, under the gaze of critics and fans, but nothing compared to this. Nothing had ever stripped him of control so completely. The gallery seemed to lean closer, each person subconsciously aware that they were witnessing the final unraveling. Judge Subramanian paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the weight of the moment settle fully on Diddy's shoulders. He flipped through the final documents one last time, eyes scanning lines of text, signatures, observations, and notes. The combination of deliberate misconduct, concealment, and repeated defiance leaves this court with no reasonable option. He said slowly, each syllable deliberate, sharp. You have chosen to disregard every opportunity to correct your course. Diddy's chest rose and fell rapidly. His hands twitched against the cold wood of the table. The room felt hotter, smaller, as if the walls themselves were pressing in. He remembered his life before this moment, stadiums filled with screaming fans, award shows, red carpets, champagne toasts, and now all of it seemed distant, almost unreal, like a dream he could no longer claim. The judge's gaze lifted, locking onto Diddy with a steady, unflinching intensity. The court must now determine whether any leniency remains, whether the remainder of your sentence can stand, or whether the system's trust must be removed entirely. Agnilo's hands shook slightly as he prepared to speak, but the judge's piercing stare silenced him before a word left his lips. Diddy's knees wobbled. He gripped the edge of the table tighter, as if the wood could anchor him to reality. But reality had shifted. He was no longer a superstar in control of every stage. He was a man defined by the judgment of a single, unyielding authority. The prosecutor stepped back, voice calm but laden with finality. Your Honor, in addition to the evidence presented, social and institutional impact must be considered. Allowing leniency after deliberate misconduct risks the integrity of the entire system. This court cannot ignore the precedent that would send that rules can be broken without consequence, even at the highest levels of notoriety. Diddy's stomach twisted. He had seen headlines ruin lives before, watched friends and rivals crumble under media scrutiny. But this was different. This was not headlines. This was life. It was permanence. Every breath became a calculation, every sound a threat. He glanced briefly at the gallery, reporters, officers, court staff, all eyes locked on him, waiting for the final blow. The judge rose slightly, the chair creaking under his weight. The movement drew everyone's eyes. He adjusted the final folder, cleared his throat, and the words that followed fell with the inevitability of a guillotine. Mr. Combs, the court has considered the totality of your actions, the risk you present, and the failure to demonstrate reform. It is the judgment of this court that Diddy's entire body tensed. The room seemed to freeze. Every soul inside sensed the moment before an unalterable fate. Diddy's eyes darted between his lawyer, the prosecutor, the judge. His hands shook. His mind raced. And yet, he was paralyzed. The judge's voice dropped lower, deliberate, the syllables echoing in the room. The remaining sentence of Shah Combs is hereby extended. 30 years, no eligibility for appeal. The words landed like thunder. Gasps erupted. Cameras clicked frantically. Reporters shouted into microphones. The gallery reacted with disbelief. But Diddy? He didn't move. His body trembled faintly, his eyes staring hollowly at the table. 30 years. No appeal. The words repeated in his mind, each echo slicing deeper than the last. Outside, the world exploded. News channels scrambled, social media lit ablaze with every detail. The headlines would define him forever. Diddy life sentence extended, hidden bottle seals fate. Superstar faces 30 years without appeal. Prison violation unravels legend. Inside, Diddy's knees weakened. The marshal gripped his arm to steady him, the cuffs cold against his skin. He took a shaky breath. A whisper escaped his lips, barely audible. No. 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 The judge's gavel fell again, soft but final. The room was a storm of chaos. Yet within it, Diddy felt only silence and abyss stretching before him, a life condensed into a single, crushing moment of judgment. The heavy doors of Fort Dix clanged shut behind Diddy. The echo bounced off the concrete walls like a warning, reverberating down long, sterile corridors. Every step he took felt amplified, every clang of metal, every soft shuffle of the guard's boots pressing into his chest like an invisible weight. The world outside, the flashing cameras, the shouting reporters, the frantic headlines was gone. All that remained was the sterile, fluorescent-lit reality of confinement, immediate and absolute. Diddy's wrists burned from the cold metal of the cuffs. The marshal's grip was firm, unyielding. Each step toward the processing area, toward the cells, made his stomach twist tighter. He felt exposed, naked not in body but in identity, stripped of fame, stripped of choice, reduced to a number in a system that demanded compliance or punishment. As they moved, the other inmates glanced up, eyes calculating. Some whispered, some stared openly, assessing the man whose name had just shattered headlines nationwide. Diddy noticed none of it. His mind was locked on one thought: 30 years, no appeal, the finality of it, every memory, every triumph, every song, every accolade gone, swallowed by a sentence that seemed to stretch endlessly before him. In the processing room, the guards moved with practiced precision. Diddy was stripped of personal belongings, searched, and assigned the standard gray jumpsuit. The uniform felt heavy, suffocating, the fabric stiff and unfamiliar against his skin. Each button, each adjustment, each step deeper into the system felt like a small surrender, a reminder that every ounce of control he had wielded in the outside world no longer existed. A guard led him down a narrow corridor, the walls lined with reinforced doors. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly, throwing shadows that danced across the walls like silent witnesses. Diddy's footsteps echoed, an endless cadence marking the passage into a new reality. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to be powerless. The world that had once bent to his fame was gone. In its place was the unrelenting order of Fort Dix, indifferent to legend, indifferent to history, indifferent to him. They reached the cell. Maximum restriction. A single, narrow room with gray walls and a steel bed bolted to the floor. No windows. The air smelled faintly of bleach, cold and sterile. Diddy's chest rose and fell unevenly as he stepped inside, the door locking behind him with a sound final and absolute. He moved to the bed, ran a hand over the cold surface, feeling the stark reality of his confinement. 30 years. No appeal. No music, no fans, no red carpets, no lights. Only this small, claustrophobic space and the echo of a world that had moved on without him. He sank to the edge of the bed, head in his hands. His fingers shook. The cuffs had been removed for the cell, but the sensation of restraint lingered, etched deep into muscle memory. Every plan he had, every ambition, every hope of regaining control gone, stripped by the gavel, by the law, by the unyielding march of consequence. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time was unmeasurable here. The corridor lights hummed softly, the distant shouts of officers, the clang of doors somewhere down the hall, all became a rhythm of confinement, a steady reminder of where he was and how utterly alone he had become. Diddy's mind wandered to the first bottle, the second bottle, the logs, the memos, the mental health reports, each piece a stone in the mountain of judgment that had crushed him. He remembered the judge's voice, calm and unflinching, declaring that his fate was sealed. 30 years, no appeal. Sleep was impossible. Every sound, the scrape of a chair, the distant echo of a footstep, the whisper of air through vents kept him alert, nervous, tense. The cell felt alive, oppressive, a breathing entity reminding him that there was no escape. The weight of every past action, every misstep, every act of defiance pressed down, an invisible hand tightening around his chest. He thought of music, briefly. The stages, the crowds, the roar of fans chanting his name. The life that had once felt infinite now seemed impossibly distant, like a dream fading in the light of harsh reality. Each note, each lyric, each memory was now a relic of someone else's life, someone who existed before the gavel, before the bottle, before the reports that labeled him volatile and untrustworthy. A guard's knock pulled him from the spiral. The door slid open with a sharp mechanical hiss. Food, water, standard protocol, nothing more. Diddy took it silently, eyes fixed on the gray walls. The guard left without a word, and silence returned dense, heavy, suffocating. 30 years stretched in every direction, each day indistinguishable from the next, measured only by routine, order, and obedience. Hours bled into days. Diddy began to feel the weight of confinement in ways he hadn't imagined. Muscles stiffened, thoughts turned inward, sleep came in fitful bursts, haunted by the images of the courtroom, the judge's eyes, the flashing cameras, the headlines, the endless reminder that the world outside had moved on, and he had been left behind, trapped in a sentence that was both punishment and erasure. Even the other inmates, once a peripheral background, began to loom larger in his mind. Their whispers, their stares, their calculated glances became part of the walls, part of the pressure, part of a reality that he could not bend. Maximum restriction was not just physical, it was psychological. Every movement watched, every sound noted, every word measured. Freedom, as he had known it, was a memory, and the cell was an unrelenting reminder of the cost of every choice he had ever made. And yet, somewhere in the marrow of despair, a spark remained. Not hope exactly, not yet, but recognition. A recognition of the unyielding truth. To survive 30 years in a cage designed to break men, he would need more than fear or regret. He would need strategy. He would need patience. And somewhere, buried under layers of shock, anger, and disbelief, a plan began to form, slow and careful, in the mind of a man who had once commanded the world. But for now, there was only the cell, only the gray walls, only the echo of what had been, and the impossible stretch of what was yet to come. Weeks passed in the sterile corridors of Fort Dix, yet to Diddy, the days were indistinguishable, blending into one another like an endless gray canvas. The hum of fluorescent lights became a constant pulse, the steel bars a permanent frame around his existence. He moved mechanically through the routine's meals, handed through slots, counts at fixed hours, the cold, impersonal instructions of guards echoing like commands from another world. Every motion, every breath, a reminder that the man who once commanded stadiums now answered to walls, metal, and orders. The whispers among inmates were a new kind of music, subtle, unpredictable, and dangerous. Eyes followed him as he passed in the hallways. Some nodded in acknowledgement, others tested him with lingering stares. Diddy knew these were not mere glances. They were assessments, calculations. In the microcosm of Fort Dix, perception equaled power or vulnerability. He absorbed it all silently, letting it roll over him like water over stone, while his mind replayed every courtroom detail, every judge's gaze, every headline announcing his downfall. The first few nights were relentless. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by memories of the gavel, the hidden bottles, the logs that had sealed his fate. He woke repeatedly, heart hammering, mouth dry, mind spinning with the impossibility of what had been handed to him. 30 years with no appeal, every opportunity extinguished. The world outside the fame, the lights, the music, felt both distant and irrelevant. The future he had imagined, even the one he had feared, had been obliterated in a single moment. Yet confinement is a teacher, brutal but thorough. The monotony of the gray cell, the unyielding order of maximum restriction, forced introspection that fame and power had never allowed. Diddy began to dissect himself, not the superstar, not the persona, but the man beneath the name, the choices that led here, the reckless defiance that had transformed opportunity into prison walls. He traced each misstep, each ignored warning, each time the law had extended a hand only to be met with defiance. The reality was harsh, merciless. He had brought this upon himself, and no one outside would alter the outcome. The first confrontation came quietly, almost unnoticed. A fellow inmate, older, gaunt, and deliberate, approached him in the recreation yard during the hour of limited exposure. "They watch you differently," the man said, voice low, eyes sharp. "You're not just another number. They're testing. Every move counts. You want to survive? You learn to play the walls, not the people." Diddy nodded, silent, absorbing each word. He realized that even inside, power had a rhythm, a system, Understanding it meant survival. Ignoring it meant annihilation. Weeks turned to months. Diddy began mapping the routines, the guard rotations, the patterns in meal delivery, in counts, in the subtle shifts of authority among inmates. He took mental notes of who held influence, who could be persuaded, who would crumble under observation. The prison, once an impenetrable cage, began to reveal cracks, small, almost imperceptible openings that a patient mind might exploit. He kept his observations close, sharing nothing, reacting minimally, masking fear with an appearance of resigned compliance. And yet, the weight of 30 years lingered, pressing down like a physical force. Every echo of his past life songs, stages, fans, headlines, arrived unbidden in his mind, colliding with the sterile reality of gray walls and unyielding schedules. The first months were marked by despair, almost debilitating, punctuated by sudden, sharp pangs of regret that left him breathless and shaken. But despair alone would not kill 30 years. Indifference, strategy, adaptation that would allow him to endure, to exist, to survive. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Diddy began to reclaim a fragment of control. Small victories, responding to counts with precision, navigating recreation without incident, avoiding provocations, building silent alliances. He discovered that influence, even here, came not from volume or fame, but observation, calculation, patience. He could bend the environment to him not by force, but by perception, by timing, by understanding the delicate hierarchies of human behavior under extreme confinement. Yet the specter of the judge's words, the gavel, the second bottle, the relentless headlines never left him. Every day began with the echo of those moments, a reminder that one misstep could erase months of careful navigation. He learned to carry the fear, to use it, to let it sharpen focus without allowing it to break him. The psychological assessment, once a dagger to his pride, became a mirror, reflecting weaknesses and strengths alike. He began to see the volatility in himself not as a flaw, but as a tool, something to be measured, controlled, and redirected. By the end of the first year, Diddy had transformed not the man of stadiums, not the superstar defined by applause, but a survivor, honed by consequence and confinement. He walked the corridors with measured steps, eyes observing, ears attuned to the subtle shifts of authority. The guards no longer seemed omnipotent. The other inmates no longer seemed inscrutable. He existed within the rhythm of Fort Dix, bending to it without breaking, mastering small domains of control, preserving energy, observing opportunities. Letters arrived sporadically from the outside world, brief, distant, almost alien. Some from former collaborators, some from fans, some from family. He read them with detached curiosity, the old attachments no longer driving his daily existence, but a faint pulse reminding him that life beyond the walls continued. He could not act upon it, could not change it, could not influence it, only accept. Diddy had lost freedom, fame, and certainty, but he had gained something unexpected. 30 years was a lifetime, yet within it, there was a path to mastery not over the world outside, but over himself, over the system, over the minutiae of survival. He learned to pace his mind, to calculate, to endure. He became an observer, a strategist, a man who understood that the walls could contain him physically, but not mentally if he chose to fight with patience, cunning, and unwavering attention. The months turned into years, each day a repetition of the last yet subtly different, a puzzle to navigate, a system to decode. And though the shadow of the judge's sentence loomed, the bottle that had started it all, and the headlines that had humiliated him forever, Diddy found a fragile equilibrium. He understood the cost of defiance, he understood the price of mistakes, and he learned, in the quiet, harsh reality of Fort Dix, the ultimate lesson: survival demands adaptation, and even a life dismantled can be rebuilt not as it was, but into something stronger, sharper, unbroken in will if not in circumstance. 30 years stretched endlessly before him, a lifetime of consequence, loss, and isolation. And yet, in that endless stretch, Diddy began to navigate, to survive, to endure. The walls had not defeated him, they had revealed him. And in that revelation, there was power, subtle, quiet, yet undeniably his.